Hello and welcome. So, if you're running a clinical trial, you're already familiar with the global standards for quality and ethics. But what happens when you bring that trial to the United States? Well, it's not as simple as just following the same international rulebook. Today, we're going to break down exactly how the US takes those global guidelines and transforms them into something very, very different: legally enforceable law.
So let's start with the big question. What really is the difference between a global guideline that everyone generally agrees to and a hard and fast rule that can land you in serious trouble here in the US? It's a critical distinction, and honestly, it's the key to understanding how clinical research actually gets done stateside. To get to the bottom of this, we really need to look at two key things: the global standards, which you know as ICH GCP, and the US Food and Drug Administration, the FDA. This is where we see a guideline evolve into a regulation. I think the best way to think about it is like this. ICH GCP is kind of like a beautifully designed, globally accepted architect's blueprint for a building. It lays out all the principles for a safe, sound structure. But here in the US, the FDA's Code of Federal Regulations, or CFR, that's the actual legally binding building code. You can have the best blueprint in the world, but if you don't follow the local code, your project is getting shut down. Simple as that. And that's why this distinction is just so critical. The consequences are worlds apart. If you don't follow the ICH guidelines, you might damage your study's reputation. And that's not good. But if you ignore FDA regulations, now you're looking at your trial being put on hold, facing some pretty hefty fines, or even being disqualified from conducting research altogether. The stakes are just so much higher. So, what's actually in this US regulatory blueprint? Let's peel back the layers and look at the specific parts of the law that you absolutely have to know inside and out. Okay, these 5 parts of Title 21 CFR are basically the pillars of U.S. clinical trial regulation. These are not suggestions, they are the law. They cover the whole shebang, from how you manage your electronic data in Part 11, all the way to how you protect the human subjects who volunteer for your study. You simply can't run a trial in the United States without having mastered these 5 areas. So, we've talked about the theory. How does this all actually play out in the real world? Let's take a look at 3 key processes where you can see these FDA regulations really come to life. First up is the Investigational New Drug Application, or IND. This is essentially your official permission slip from the FDA. You have to package up all your preclinical data, your manufacturing info, your protocols, and prove that your product is reasonably safe to even begin testing in people. And your trial doesn't move an inch until the FDA gives the green light, which they have 30 days to review. Next, we have the Institutional Review Board, the IRB. Think of them as the ethical watchdog for your trial. This is a totally independent committee, and their job is to approve every single aspect of your study, from the science in the protocol to the language in the consent forms, all before you enroll a single participant. And they don't just approve it and walk away. They keep a close eye on things for the entire duration. And really, at the absolute heart of the IRB's mission is this principle of informed consent. This is so much more than getting a signature on a piece of paper. It is an entire process, a conversation, designed to make sure every single person who joins a study does so completely voluntarily with a crystal clear understanding of the purpose, the risks, and the benefits. All right, so you've navigated the approvals, you've got your trial up and running. Great. But what happens when something unexpected, something serious goes wrong? Well, the FDA has incredibly strict rules about reporting safety events. And believe me, the consequences for not following them are severe. 7. Just let that number sink in. 7 days. That's the amount of time you have to report a fatal or life-threatening adverse reaction to the FDA. And I need to be really clear here. That's not 7 business days. That is 7 calendar days. This is absolutely not a suggestion. It is a ticking clock, and it tells you everything you need to know about how seriously the FDA takes patient safety. So how does that 7-day clock actually work in practice? It's a very clear chain of responsibility. It all kicks off with the investigator at the trial site. As soon as they become aware of a serious adverse event, they have to report it immediately to the sponsor. The sponsor then assesses it, and if it meets the criteria, boom, that 7-day timer starts for reporting to the FDA. And of course, they have to make sure every other investigator and IRB is kept in the loop. And what if you don't follow these rules? Well, the FDA has a whole toolbox of enforcement actions. It could start with something called a Form 483, which is basically a list of inspectional observations. But it can escalate quickly to a formal warning letter, an order to put your entire trial on hold, having the FDA reject all of your hard-earned data, or even the ultimate penalty, disqualifying an investigator from research for good. Okay, so let's try to put all these pieces together. How do these US-specific regulations really make a difference in practice? A quick case study should make it pretty clear. Imagine you're running a big oncology trial in both Europe and the United States. Now, in both locations, you need ethical approval, of course. But in the US, you've got these extra mandatory layers. You have to file that IND application just to get permission to start. If a terrible adverse event happens, you're on that strict 7-day reporting clock with the FDA. And all of your electronic data systems, they have to meet the incredibly rigorous audit trail requirements of 21 CFR Part 11. These are all specific legal requirements that go above and beyond the general global guidelines. So it's easy to look at all of this, the IND, the reporting timelines, the specific regulations, and see them as just a bunch of extra hoops to jump through. But I want to leave you with this thought. Every single one of these rules is there for a profound reason. They aren't just about checking boxes for a regulator. They are about protecting the very people who make medical progress possible, the trial participants, and building the kind of public trust that is absolutely essential for the entire research process to even exist. And really, that's worth all the extra paperwork.